My name is Eleanor Marks, and I'm 56 years old. If there's one thing life taught me, sometimes too late, it's that silence can be more powerful than rage. If you've ever felt like someone was slowly erasing you from your own life, stick around. This is how I turned his betrayal into my freedom. And if this story hits you in any way, please like the video and subscribe. Because some of us need to hear what others are too afraid to say. When I met Thomas, I wasn't young and I wasn't naive, or so I thought. At 52, I had already lived a full life. Marriage, motherhood, a bitter divorce, and a career in non-profit management that kept me grounded in reality. I'd learned not to fall for sweet talk or surface charm. I thought I had built armor, thick, polished, and impenetrable, but Thomas slipped through the cracks like smoke. He wasn't like the men I'd known before, restless, distracted, or intimidated by a woman with opinions. He had a calm kind of presence, like someone who knew exactly who he was and didn't need to prove anything. The kind of man who made space for others instead of filling every inch of the room with his ego. We met at a gallery opening in Charleston. I wasn't supposed to be there. A friend dragged me along because she didn't want to face her ex alone. I remember standing next to a massive abstract painting, sipping warm Chardonnay, and wondering how long I had to stay before it was polite to leave. Then I heard his voice before I saw him. Deep, measured, amused. He was talking to the gallery owner about a Rothko knockoff hanging in the corner. You can always tell when someone paints emotion instead of feeling it, he said. It's like watching someone cry on cue. That made me laugh, unexpectedly, out loud. He turned toward me and smiled like he'd been waiting for that moment all night. Thomas Harding. That's how he introduced himself. Not Tom or Tommy. Full name, firm handshake, soft eyes, salt and pepper hair, tailored blazer, no wedding ring. He told me he was in commercial real estate, semi-retired, recently widowed. His wife, Marlene, had passed 2 years prior. Cancer. Fast and cruel, he said, with a quiet reverence. But she made me promise not to mourn too long. He wore grief like a tailored suit, dignified but flattering. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was something maybe more dangerous. Comfort. Immediate, unearned trust. The feeling of being seen after years of being invisible. He listened like it mattered. Remembered the name of my dog. Picked up on details I didn't know I'd shared. How I took my coffee, black, no sugar. That I used to play piano. That I hated being interrupted mid-sentence, no matter how politely. Thomas never interrupted. He waited. We started seeing each other casually. At least, that's what I told myself. Lunch dates turned into dinners, into weekends. He'd show up with tulips on Wednesdays just because they reminded him of Amsterdam, where I once said I wanted to travel. He learned my rhythm when I got overwhelmed, when I needed space, and he gave it to me, or made it seem like he did. He moved fast, but never in a way that felt threatening. He never said, "You're mine." Instead, it was, "I want to build a life with you." Not, "I need to own you," but "I want to take care of you." And after years of doing everything myself, managing bills, fixing leaky faucets, making dinner for one, it was intoxicating to let go, just a little, to feel held. The first red flag didn't wave, it whispered. It came in the form of a comment over brunch at a seaside cafe. We were talking about retirement dreams, his idea of buying a cabin near Asheville, mine of finally writing that book I kept putting off. "You know you'd never have to work again if you moved in with me," he said, stirring cream into his coffee. "We'd be comfortable, safe, I laughed it off at the time. "I'm not a damsel in distress, Thomas," he smiled. "Of course not, but even warriors get tired." I should have paid more attention to that line. Even warriors get tired. Looking back, I can see it now, how he framed himself as my salvation, my anchor. Not in an overt way. He never asked me to give up my job, my friends, or my independence. He just made them feel less necessary. He encouraged me to spend less time volunteering at the shelter, said the drive was too long, the stress not worth it. "You give so much to everyone else," he'd say, tucking a stray hair behind my ear. "When's the last time someone gave something to you?" The first time I stayed at his house overnight, he made me breakfast in bed. French toast, fresh berries, coffee exactly how I liked it. The plate had a little note tucked under the edge. "For the woman who finally makes this house feel alive again." It was romantic, thoughtful, and just the tiniest bit suffocating. He started referring to our future as if it were a foregone conclusion. Summer trips, holiday traditions, grandkids I hadn't met yet, a shared bank account for groceries, for convenience, a key to his house so you don't have to knock. I told myself I was just scared, that I didn't want to sabotage something good because of old wounds. My therapist said I had attachment trauma. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was broken. And Thomas didn't make me feel broken. He made me feel chosen. But there's a fine line between being cherished and being captured. And Thomas knew how to blur that line with precision. The night he proposed, we were in Savannah. He'd planned the whole weekend, horse-drawn carriage rides, riverfront dinners, rose petals in the hotel suite. It felt like something out of a movie. And yet, underneath the romance, I felt a flicker of unease. Not because I didn't love him, not because I didn't want a life with someone again, but because something inside me, some deep, ancient instinct, was whispering. "Look again," I said. "Yes, anyway," and that whisper hasn't stopped since. I used to believe that trust is built in grand gestures, promises, loyalty, shared plans. But now I know it's broken by the smallest things. Almost invisible. So quiet you can convince yourself they didn't happen at all. After we got engaged, something in Thomas shifted. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. He didn't become cruel. He didn't yell. He didn't hit. No, it was more subtle than that. Smarter. He just began to tighten. Like a man pulling invisible strings around the life we were building, one thread at a time. It started with the thermostat. I like the house cool when I sleep. 67, maybe 68 degrees. Always have. I mentioned that once in passing, and during the first few months of staying over, he honored it without question. But one night, just 2 weeks after the engagement, I woke up drenched in sweat. The thermostat read 74. I adjusted it back down, assuming it was a mistake. The next morning, he said nothing. That night, it happened again. This time, I mentioned it. "Oh," he said, blinking. I thought the heat kicked on automatically. But the thermostat was digital, programmable. He knew how it worked. He'd bragged about installing it himself. Still, I let it go. Then came the mirror. I used a small magnifying mirror every morning for my makeup. It sat on the edge of the bathroom counter, always in the same place. One day it was missing. I moved it into the drawer, he said. The counter looked cluttered. It wasn't cluttered. I only kept 2 things there, my mirror and my moisturizer. But again, I told myself it wasn't a big deal. A week later, my favorite coffee mug disappeared. A silly thing, ceramic, hand-painted, with chipped edges and a faded quote from my daughter. I looked for it in the dishwasher, the cupboards, the sink. Nowhere. I dropped it, he said with a frown. I meant to tell you. There was no broken ceramic in the trash, no guilt in his voice. I started writing small things down. Not because I thought he was lying, but because I needed to remember that they had happened. Something inside me felt off, and when I tried to talk to him about it, he turned warm and wounded. "You're acting like I'm the enemy," he said once, when I asked about a missing letter from my son. "Why are you so suspicious?" Because I didn't feel crazy. But I was starting to wonder if that's what he wanted. Soon after, my friendships began to fade, not by his command, but by his suggestion. "It's strange how much time you still spend with Judith," he'd say. "I thought she was always a bit judgmental about us." Or, "You always come back from lunch with Carla so drained. Is she really good for your energy?" They weren't insults. They were concerns. Always wrapped in care, always delivered with that thoughtful Thomas tone, the one that made you doubt your own gut. And it worked. I stopped texting back as often, skipped coffee dates, turned down invitations. One day I looked at my phone and realized I hadn't spoken to anyone outside of Thomas in a week. He was still affectionate, still sweet, still brought flowers on random Tuesdays and kissed me on the forehead before bed. But when I asked him for space, a day alone, a weekend at my daughter's, he got quiet. Not angry, not demanding, just disappointed. And that disappointment hung in the air like wet clothes that wouldn't dry. After we married, just a modest courthouse ceremony with champagne afterward, his language changed. He stopped saying, "if we," and started saying, "you will. You'll come with me to the firm's dinner next month. You'll want to get rid of that old couch. It clashes with the living room. You'll feel better once we change your insurance policy. Over." It was subtle, but suffocating, like being folded into someone else's life, slowly, gently, until you no longer recognized where your own edges were. Then came the financial merging. I had always handled my own money, not because I was rich, far from it, but because after my divorce, I promised myself I would never give someone that kind of power again. Thomas, of course, was understanding, supportive. "We don't have to combine anything," he said early on. "I just think it's simpler." But one day, I noticed my name was added to an account I hadn't signed for. A joint savings account. Small deposit amounts, but steady transfers from his funds into it, followed by friendly conversations like, "Since we're both contributing now, maybe we can look at properties together." He framed it as generosity, but I hadn't contributed. Not a penny. And when I asked about it, he said, "I just thought it'd make you feel more secure." Secure. That word again. He said it a lot, actually. "I want you to feel secure. This is for your security. You'll always be secure with me." It sounded like love, but what it really meant was control. The first real fracture came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was cleaning out the upstairs guest room. Thomas had suggested turning it into an office for me, and found a small wooden box tucked behind some books. I shouldn't have opened it. But I did. Inside were documents, old ones, mostly. His marriage certificate with Marlene, her death certificate, some property deeds, and a single envelope marked private. It was a letter from a woman named Sarah. I didn't know a Sarah. The return address was in Florida, It was dated almost a year after Thomas told me Marlene had died. The letter was brief, handwritten in shaky cursive. Thomas, I saw your name in the paper about the fundraiser. I was surprised, but I suppose I shouldn't be. I hope you told your new friend the truth. I still can't believe you left without a word. I deserved better than silence. I read it 3 times. Truth? New friend? Left without a word? I put everything back exactly how I found it. That night, I asked Thomas, casually, "Did you ever date anyone between Marlene and me?" He looked up from his book. "No, not really. Not really." I let the silence stretch between us, then nodded like I believed him, but inside, I was taking notes. My armor, rusted and forgotten, was slowly coming back online. I didn't know what was going on yet, but I knew enough to stop assuming I knew the man I'd married, and I knew one thing for certain. Thomas was counting on me not noticing the small things, but I was paying attention now. The problem with secrets is they always leave a scent. Faint maybe, almost unnoticeable. But if you're quiet enough, patient enough, and you stop second-guessing yourself, eventually, you smell it. After I found the letter from Sarah, I couldn't sleep. Not because of the letter itself, but because of what it implied. That there were whole sections of Thomas's life he had carefully edited. Cropped photos, trimmed timelines, rewritten roles. And if he'd lied about something as simple as, "Did you date after your wife died?" What else was under there, covered in just enough charm to keep me from asking questions? So I started, small, quiet. I knew I couldn't confront him. Not yet. He was too good with words. Too good at making me feel dramatic, paranoid, unreasonable. If I was going to put the pieces together, I'd need to do it like he never expected. Methodically, invisibly. The first clue came from a calendar. Thomas kept a sleek black planner on his nightstand, always closed, always aligned perfectly with the lamp base. He claimed it helped him disconnect from work by writing things down rather than using his phone. He never offered to show it to me, never referenced it aloud. But he kept it close. One morning, while he was out for a run, I opened it. Most of it was filled with benign entries, client calls, dinner reservations, dentist appointments. But a few things stuck out. Dates circled without notes, initials I didn't recognize, JH, MC, R, and scattered throughout the months were small stars in red ink. No explanations. Just a 5-pointed mark, like a child's. Reward system. I flipped back to the month we'd gotten engaged. There was a star on that day, then another the week after, then 2 stars the day we signed the prenup. Except, we hadn't signed a prenup. Or so I thought. That sent me to the filing cabinet in the office. Thomas never restricted access to anything in the house. He didn't have to. His real power was making you feel foolish for even wanting to look. Duck. Files were alphabetized, neat. But there, between mortgage and taxes, was a thick folder labeled Personal Agreements. I opened it, half expecting to find nothing important. Instead, I found a document titled Mutual Financial Understanding and Asset Protection Agreement between Thomas W. Callahan and Catherine L. Reed, my name. His signature, a notary stamp. My signature, except I never signed it. The handwriting was similar, but not mine. Not even a good imitation. Just enough. I took a photo of the page. My hands were shaking, and then I saw the date. It was the same day he'd taken me to that spa. Weekend upstate. He said it was a surprise, a gift, just us, no distractions. Champagne and couples massages and 1 glass of wine too many. While I'd been relaxing, he'd filed a legal document with a forged signature. I wanted to vomit. That night I acted normal, cooked dinner, laughed at his jokes, let him kiss me. Good night. And the next morning, I went to the county records office. I told the clerk I needed to verify my marriage certificate. She asked for my ID, then printed it without hesitation. Date, October 3rd. Witnesses, 2 names I didn't know. Officiant, Judge Franklin Rhodes. Location, courthouse room. 2B. I stared at it. That was all accurate, but stapled behind it, unasked for, was a copy of the license application. It had a section for prior marriages, finalized date, Thomas. Had written that he was widowed. Date of death for Marlene Callahan, March 6th. But I remembered something from that box upstairs. Her death certificate had been dated March 28th. Why lie about that? It was only 3 weeks, unless the lie wasn't about when she died, but that she died at all. That night, when Thomas was in the shower, I crept back into the guest room and pulled the wooden box again. This time I wasn't gentle. Found Marlene's death certificate, issued in Georgia, dated March 28, 2021, cause of death, accidental fall, closed head injury. There was no coroner's signature, just a typed name and a blurry stamp. Something about it felt off. The next morning, I called the Georgia Department of Health, asked to verify the death certificate. They told me no such record existed in their system. No Marlene Callahan with that birth date. No matching certificate number. Are you sure it's official? The woman on the phone asked. I didn't answer. I started digging harder. I found an old laptop Thomas kept in a drawer, said he used it just for backups. It wasn't password protected. Inside were folders labeled with strange names: Winchester, Greenline, Monarch. One of them contained PDF scans of documents, ID cards, credit applications, bank statements, all with different names. But the same face. Thomas, under at least 4 aliases. He'd opened accounts under the name Gregory Wells, received mail as Samuel Green, and even registered a business as Michael Trent. The trail wasn't tidy. Some documents were years old, others recent. But they all had one thing in common: women. Each alias was tied to a joint account, an address, or a property shared with a woman. Some had legal documents attached: wills, powers of attorney, notarized, forms. He had a system: seduce, secure access, erase, and I was the latest entry. I took photos of everything, sent them to a new email I created, one he couldn't trace. Then I printed the essentials and stored them at my friend Judith's house under the guise of tax stuff. He hadn't fully isolated me yet. Not entirely. But now I knew what I was dealing with. Not just a liar, not just a manipulator, a man who had designed his life around deception, who forged documents, created identities, controlled narratives, and worst of all, he believed I would never look. But I was looking now, and he was about to learn just how dangerous that could be. There's a moment, right before your world turns inside out, when everything feels suspended, like the air gets heavier, like time pauses just long enough for your gut to whisper, "This won't end well." That's how it felt the day I called the woman I thought was dead. I don't know what I was expecting when I dialed the number from that old property deed in the Monarch folder. Maybe a disconnected line. Maybe some stranger. Certainly not her. Hello? The voice. On the other end was sharp, clear, not ghostly, not the voice of a dead woman. "Hi, I'm sorry. Is this Marlene Callahan?" Silence, then cautiously. "Who's asking?" I froze. My mouth went dry. "I'm Catherine Reed. I believe we might have something in common." Another pause. And then she laughed. Not kindly, not nervously, but bitterly. "Let me guess. Thomas?" I didn't have to say anything. She already knew. That was the moment I realized I wasn't special. I wasn't the first. And I probably wouldn't have been the last. She asked me one question before anything else. "Are you safe?" It hit me harder than any lie ever could. We spoke for nearly 2 hours. Marlene wasn't dead. Not by a long shot. She was living under her maiden name in a town 3 states away, working part-time at a library and rebuilding her life one breath at a time. She told me everything. How she met Thomas, or Michael, as he introduced himself back then, when she was still in grad school. How charming he was, how protective. How within a year he had isolated her from friends, taken over their finances, and convinced her to give up her last name for unity. He proposed to her on a mountaintop, said all the right things, and just like me, she believed him. She started noticing inconsistencies after their 2nd anniversary. A bank statement she never remembered approving. A credit card she hadn't opened. Then came the strange business trips, the burner phones, the cold silences whenever she asked too many questions. When she finally confronted him, he didn't yell. He smiled, as if she was a child trying to play detective in a grown man's game. The next day, she was locked out of their joint account. Her car, technically registered to his company, was towed from their driveway. And when she went to the police, he produced documents, signed forms, a prenup she didn't remember signing, sound familiar, and a psychiatric evaluation, claiming she was unstable, paranoid, potentially harmful to herself. She was committed for 72 hours. By the time she was released, he had disappeared. House sold, accounts emptied, paper trail gone. She said it took her months to claw her life back, years to speak of it without shaking. And now, somehow, he had reappeared in my life, under the same eyes, the same lies, but a different name. I asked her about the death certificate. "That?" she said bitterly. "He forged it. I only found out when I tried to get a new passport. My social was listed as deceased. He had literally erased her. Why didn't you go public?" I asked. "I tried," she said, "but he always stayed one step ahead. He had lawyers, aliases, and no digital footprint. By the time anyone took me seriously, the trail had gone cold. I got tired. I just wanted peace." She paused, then added, "But if you're still in it, if you're with him, you need to get out. Now." I hung up with a swirling pit in my stomach. There are lies you can forgive, lies you can rationalize, justify, learn to live with. And then there are lies that shatter your sense of reality. Marlene wasn't some ghost from a tragic past. She was a warning I never got, proof of a pattern I was now entangled in. And it meant one thing very, very clearly. Thomas was dangerous. Not just a manipulator, not just a forger, a predator. He didn't just ruin lives, he reprogrammed them. Took women who trusted him and rewrote their stories until they couldn't recognize themselves. That night, I packed a small bag. Essentials only: my passport, cash, USB drives with all the evidence I'd gathered, copies of the forged documents, printouts of his fake identities. I didn't leave immediately. I waited, watched. For 2 days, I pretended everything was normal. I kissed him goodbye in the morning, made his favorite pasta at night, let him touch me without flinching. But inside, I was a fuse, already burning. On the third morning, I followed him, said I was meeting a friend for brunch. Instead, I tailed his car from a safe distance, 2 turns, behind, always in traffic. He wasn't going to the office. He pulled into a suburban neighborhood I didn't recognize, parked in front of a pale blue house, walked up the steps like he'd done it 100 times. Used a key. He stayed inside for nearly an hour. I watched, waited, wrote down the address, then drove to a nearby gas station, used the payphone, and called the number I'd seen in his planner. Beside the initials, R, a woman answered. Hello? Hi, is this Rachel? Yes? This is going to sound strange, but are you involved with a man named Thomas Callahan? Silence. Then, cautiously, yes. Who is this? I'm his wife. I'll never forget the sound she made. A kind of stunned exhale, like someone being punched in the stomach. I didn't stay on the line. I didn't have to, because by now I knew Thomas had never stopped, never paused, never changed. He wasn't capable of love, or loyalty, or even truth. His entire existence was a shell game, always one identity ahead, always one woman behind. But now he'd made a mistake. He thought I'd be like the others, that I'd crumble, hide, disappear quietly. But I wasn't going anywhere, because now I had proof, I had names, I had voices willing to speak, and most importantly, I had nothing left to lose. When you live with a man like Thomas, you learn early on that truth is a dangerous currency. You don't spend it unless you're ready to burn everything down. So, I didn't confront him. I didn't scream, accuse, or demand explanations. Instead, I became exactly who he thought I was: quiet, trusting, manageable. And in the silence between his lies, I began to build my escape. First, I needed money. Not just a few dollars stuffed in a purse, but real money. Enough to leave, disappear, and stay gone. Our finances had always been joint on paper, but in practice, Thomas handled it all. He paid the bills, managed the investments, tracked every credit card. Any unusual transaction would be flagged and questioned. He'd even joked once, "No secrets in this house, sweetheart." So I got creative. I started returning small purchases. A blouse here, a pair of shoes there. I'd keep the refund cards or ask for cash when possible. I found gift cards tucked in drawers from birthdays past, used them to buy essentials, then returned the items and pocketed the cash. I sold my grandmother's locket to a consignment shop 2 towns over. Cried afterward, but did it anyway. She would have understood. Every dollar mattered. Then came the documents. I made digital copies of everything: property deeds, insurance papers, his IDs, the forged prenup, the burner phones I found in his drawer. I backed everything up on an encrypted USB, which I hid inside a tampon box, something he'd never touch. I opened a new bank account under my maiden name using a small-town credit union. No online banking, no big-name flags. Just a quiet little place run by a woman named Louise, who thought I was planning a divorce and gave me the kindest eyes I'd seen in weeks. "Whatever you're leaving," she said, "you deserve to land on your feet." I smiled. But inside, I was shaking, because every step I took toward freedom made me more afraid of being caught. Thomas was many things: a liar, a manipulator, but not stupid. He paid attention to patterns, moods, shifts in tone. If I looked away too long or forgot to laugh at his jokes, he'd notice. If I spent too much time out, he'd ask questions. And if he ever saw that USB, that second phone, that new account, I didn't know what he'd do. So I played the role. Every day, every hour. I made dinner, kissed him goodbye, let him talk about his fake board meetings and non-existent employees. I laughed when he lied. I pretended not to notice the smell of another woman's perfume on his jacket. And at night, I waited for his breathing to deepen. Then I'd slide out of bed and practice. Yes, practice. Packing a bag in the dark, quietly, quickly. Timing myself. Making sure I didn't step on the creaky floorboard near the closet. Learning which lights flickered through the blinds when a car passed by so I'd know if it was him. I memorized the bus schedules. I mapped out exits from the neighborhood. I figured out how long it would take me to get to the train station, if I left on foot, and I set rules for myself. Rule 1. Never keep everything in one place. The cash, documents, phone, clothes, they were hidden in 3 separate spots around the house. If he found one, he wouldn't find all. Rule 2. No emotional goodbyes. I'd watched too many women try to talk it out one last time, hoping for closure. I didn't want closure. I wanted distance. Rule 3. Don't flinch. If he looked me in the eye and asked, "Are you hiding something?" I had to be ready to say no and mean it. There were moments when I almost broke. Once, I left my second phone charging in the kitchen. He walked in as I was reaching for it. "What's that?" he asked. My heart flipped. "Old backup," I said, calm as I could. "Battery still works, though. I thought I'd use it to play music while I cook." He smiled. "Good idea." I nodded, walked past him. Threw up in the bathroom 5 minutes later, and still, I kept going because I knew what was waiting for me if I didn't. Marlene had made that clear. So had Rachel, who called me the day after our brief conversation. She was shattered, confused. She had no idea he was married. He'd told her he was single, just taking time after a difficult past. Sound familiar? We spoke for an hour. She asked if I'd go to the police. I told her the truth. Not yet. Because there was one more thing I needed to do before I disappeared. I needed to find out just how far Thomas's web reached. I dug into public records, business registrations, shell companies, old P.O. boxes. I used his aliases, Michael, T. Monroe, Jack Reese, and traced whatever I could. He had fake LLCs registered in 4 states, 2 properties owned under names that weren't his, an offshore account linked to a trust I'd never heard of, and just enough legitimate business activity to keep him insulated from suspicion. It was sickening and brilliant. But what Thomas didn't count on was that the woman he married was smarter than he thought, that I had enough of a past, enough of a spine, to fight him at his own game. So I made one last move. I wrote a letter. Actually, several. One to a lawyer Marlene recommended, detailing everything I had found, with dates, documents, names. One to Rachel, promising she wasn't alone, that she wasn't stupid, that we were going to stop him, and one to Thomas. That one I saved for the end. It began simply, "You should have killed me when you had the chance, because now I'm the one watching." You. I didn't sign it. He didn't deserve my name. I set the date for my escape, October 9th, a Monday. He had a conference that would take him out of town for 48 hours. Perfect window. In the days leading up, I was robotic, numb, detached. I watched the autumn leaves start to fall from the sycamore in our yard and wondered if I'd ever see it again. When the morning came, I kissed him goodbye like always. He said, "Wish me luck." I smiled. "You won't need it." And then he was gone. I waited 15 minutes, then I moved, fast but calm. I retrieved my hidden bags, grabbed the USB, the cash, the prepaid phone. I didn't look back, not even once. You don't dismantle a man like Thomas by screaming in the street. You do it with paperwork, with whispers, with shadows. I left our house on October 9th with no guarantee of safety, just a plan and the cold satisfaction that, for the first time in years, the fear was no longer mine. It was about to be his. I checked into a cheap but clean motel 3 counties away under a different name. They didn't ask for much. I paid cash. No trail, no questions. The woman at the desk gave me a room with a view of the back alley, just as I'd requested. I slept with a chair under the door handle that first night. Not because I thought he'd find me, because I couldn't let myself feel safe yet. The next morning, I got to work. I mailed the envelope to the attorney, Marlene's. Contact, the one who specialized in white-collar fraud and had a habit of making problems public. Inside, copies of everything I'd found, neatly labeled, cross-referenced, and backed up 3 times. Property deeds, shell corporations, forged signatures, and most importantly, the digital trail of money laundering through his business accounts. I didn't want to ruin him in the dark. I wanted the truth to ruin him in broad daylight. Next, I called Rachel. She cried again, but not the way she had the first time. This time, there was steel in her voice. "I want to help," she said. "Whatever you're planning, count me in." So I told her everything. How he forged documents to keep me from inheritance, how he isolated and controlled me, how he had other women, likely dozens, cycling through his life like inventory. She went silent. Then, "You're not the only one with receipts." Rachel, it turned out, had been paying attention long before I contacted her. She hadn't been in love, she'd been skeptical. She'd saved voicemails, screenshots, emails, photos. She had proof he was sleeping with a 3rd woman while telling her they were exclusive. Proof that he'd lied about his income, his past, even his name. We compared notes. The puzzle pieces fit too well. Then I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, my cousin Jeremy. He'd always had a knack for digging where he shouldn't. Ex-reporter turned private investigator, now working freelance. I hadn't told him about Thomas before. Shame does that to people. It makes you hide the worst parts. When I told him everything, there was no judgment. Just one question. "You want exposure or destruction?" I answered without hesitation. "Both." Jeremy smiled through the phone. "Then buckle up." Over the next 3 weeks, I stayed invisible. No social media, no phone calls from traceable numbers. But while I vanished, Thomas's world began to crack. Rachel filed a complaint to his so-called business board. An LLC in Delaware used to funnel client money into consulting fees that didn't exist. Jeremy contacted one of the local news stations anonymously, feeding them breadcrumbs. A respected businessman under federal scrutiny for wire fraud and identity manipulation. The lawyer began prepping to file a civil case, quietly, precisely, just enough to get the court's attention. And then I pulled the final string. I sent an anonymous package to Thomas's biggest investor, Mr. Kendricks. Inside were documents showing that Thomas had been using Kendrick's name and capital as leverage for personal deals. Most of them fake, some criminally negligent. I included a note, Just a sentence. Your money isn't with you anymore, and neither am I. A week later, Kendricks pulled out, publicly, and the dominoes began to fall. Thomas, for all his charm, didn't know how to handle silence. He thrived in chaos, arguments, manipulation, spinning 10 lies at once. But now, he was fighting ghosts. No one to confront, no one to charm, just damage, and no idea where it was coming from. I imagined him pacing that house alone, checking the security cameras, watching his phone light up with missed calls and questions and frozen accounts. I imagined him sitting in that kitchen, the same one where he once smiled and told me I was lucky to be loved by someone like him. And now? The IRS was reviewing his tax records. The state attorney's office had opened a file. Rachel was testifying in front of a private legal mediator. And me? I was sipping tea in a rented cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, writing everything down, in a journal labeled Evidence. It wasn't over, of course. Men like Thomas don't go quietly. And I knew what was coming. The denial, the rage, the desperate attempts to paint himself as the victim. The calls to mutual friends, the manipulative spin, the false accusations. But I also knew something else. I had taken away the one thing he never imagined he could lose. Control. There's a part of me that still wonders what he thought when he realized I was gone, when he came home and the closet was empty. The safe was missing a few files. The scent of my perfume no longer lingered in the hallway. Did he panic? Did he smirk, thinking I'd come crawling back? Or did he finally understand that the woman he'd tried to erase had never truly disappeared? She'd just been waiting for the right moment to reappear with a match and a can of gasoline? I hope it was the last one, because the trap I set wasn't just about justice, it was about truth. I wanted everyone to see the man behind the mask, the polished liar who built his empire on manipulation and stolen identities. And I wanted him to feel what I had felt for 5 years: helplessness, confusion, and fear. But most of all, I wanted him to understand that I had been one step ahead, that every kind word he used to keep me docile, every fake smile, every empty promise, was just more rope for him to hang himself with. And now, the knot was tightening. The first message came 3 weeks after I disappeared. "Where are you?" No greeting, no apology, just 3 words, blunt and sharp like a blade. I didn't answer. 2 days later, a voicemail. "Margaret, this isn't funny. Call me back." He used my full name. His voice was tight, trying to sound calm, but I could hear it beneath the surface, that thin crack in the porcelain. He was losing it. I watched the second voicemail come in while drinking coffee on a porch overlooking a lake. This time, he didn't bother pretending. "You think you can just run? After everything I've done for you? You're acting like a child. Come home so we can talk." So we can talk. As if the last 5 years had been a misunderstanding. As if the emotional bruises, the financial manipulation, the gaslighting and lies were a disagreement over dinner plans. I didn't delete the messages. I archived them. Evidence. A week passed. Then, one morning I opened my inbox to a familiar name, Thomas Weston. Subject line: "This isn't you." I laughed. The body of the email was a symphony of guilt tactics. "You're overreacting. You need help. I forgave you for worse. You're being cruel. I'm worried about you." Each sentence carefully crafted to sound reasonable, generous, almost noble, and buried between the lines, a quiet scream, "Come back and play your part." But I wasn't playing anymore. I forwarded the email to Jeremy, He replied with a thumbs-up emoji and nothing more. We were past words now. The next email came with an attachment, a photo of us at a gala 3 years ago. I was wearing a silver dress, fake smiling. He had his arm around me like he owned me. Caption: We looked good together. We can fix this. I didn't reply, because the truth was, I didn't want to fix it. I didn't want the version of myself that tolerated being dimmed. That woman in the photo had been surviving. This one was preparing to burn the whole thing down. Rachel called me 2 days later. He's trying to get ahead of the story, she said. He's telling people you had a breakdown. Of course he was. That was always plan B. When he couldn't control you, he discredited you. He called me last night, Rachel continued. Said you've been confused lately. That you're off your meds. I told him to go to hell. I closed my eyes and took a long breath. I'd expected it. Still stung, but something had changed. I wasn't angry. I was calm. For years, I had walked on eggshells to avoid this exact fallout. And now that it was happening, now that my name was being dragged through the social mud of his circle, I felt nothing but clarity. Let him lie. Let him spin. I wasn't there to clean up after him anymore. A week later, the moment finally arrived. He showed up at my sister's front porch, uninvited. She told me about it afterward. Said she'd seen the car parked outside, engine running. He rang the bell like he owned the place. When she opened the door, he had that same look he always wore, confused, charming, dangerous. He asked where I was. She smiled and said, "Out of your reach." He didn't like that. Started ranting. Called me unstable. Said I was influencing others to turn against him. Said I had stolen documents from the house, things you don't understand. She told him he had 10 seconds to leave before she called the police. He left. But before he did, he looked her dead in the eyes and said, "She's making a mistake. She doesn't know who she's messing with." That was the moment, I think. The moment he realized I wasn't coming back. Not to the house, not to the role, not to him. Because for Thomas, it was never about love. It was about control. And when I took that from him, I didn't just hurt his ego. I shattered his identity. He wasn't the hero anymore. He was just a man standing outside a door that wouldn't open for him. Later that night, I got a call from an unknown number. Picked up. Silence. Then, "You think this is over?" His voice, cold, measured. I didn't hang up. I didn't speak. I just held the line long enough for the app to trace the call and log the time. Then I pressed record, just in case. He went on. "You're going to regret this. You think those lawyers will protect you? You think the court cares? I can make one call and..." Click. I ended it, and just like that, the power shifted again. The next morning, Jeremy called. "They're coming for him," he said. The civil court had set a hearing date. The state investigation was escalating. Kendricks had filed a formal complaint of fraud, and a local business journal had picked up the story. The headline was short and surgical. Charleston investor accused of financial misrepresentation. Women speak out. I read it 3 times. Not because I was surprised, but because finally someone else was saying the words out loud. The article mentioned anonymous testimonies, a pattern of emotional abuse, alleged financial coercion. It stopped short of criminal accusations, but it was enough. Enough to shatter the perfect image. Enough to make his phone stop ringing for the wrong reasons. Enough to make people wonder, What kind of man needs to silence the woman he claims to love? I know he's still out there, still watching, still hoping I'll crack, that I'll come crawling back to beg forgiveness or offer him one last chance at redemption. But I won't, because the woman he married is gone, and in her place is someone who no longer needs his approval, his protection, or his permission to breathe. He realized too late that I wasn't coming back, and now he's the one pacing in silence, waiting for a knock that won't come, hoping for a mercy that he never once offered me. You'd think that standing in front of a judge in a cold courtroom, hearing a lawyer read a will that your husband secretly changed, would feel like the final blow. But it wasn't. The final blow came when I looked at Thomas and he couldn't even meet my eyes. He had the decency to look nervous at least. His new suit, the one he probably bought with our shared money, didn't sit right on him. It tugged at the shoulders like it knew he wasn't built for this kind of power. Thomas's lawyer, some smug young man who didn't look old enough to drink, opened the folder and began reading. And just like that, it was official. The house, the retirement accounts, the vacation property in Hilton Head. Everything was left to his daughter, Nicole. Everything except a small trust fund to be administered at the discretion of Nicole Stevens, the primary beneficiary. My name was never mentioned, not once. He didn't even leave me a damn ring. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just watched as the judge nodded and accepted the will as legitimate, while Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He didn't look at me. He hadn't looked at me once that day. I think some part of him expected me to break down, or maybe to lash out, to scream, to beg. But I didn't, because I already knew what I had done. 3 months earlier, when I found the new will, something inside me snapped, but not in a loud, dramatic way. It was quieter than that, cleaner, more surgical. I didn't yell or confront him. I didn't even let on that I'd seen it. Instead, I copied it. I took photos, page by page, and emailed them to myself. Then, I printed a copy and slipped it into a safety deposit box I'd opened in my own name, one Thomas knew nothing about. And then I called an attorney, not just any attorney, Miriam Carlisle. She used to be a probate judge, but now she worked independently, specializing in estate disputes. And more importantly, she hated men like Thomas. Men who built pretty lives on lies and walked away with clean hands. Miriam took one look at the photos I'd taken and said, "He thinks he's clever. He's not." She had a plan, but it would take time. We'd have to wait until the will was officially filed, because that's when I could strike back. Not emotionally, not publicly, but legally. Miriam helped me draft a formal challenge, citing undue influence and fraud. But that was just the start. I started documenting everything: bank transfers, property titles, even the little things, like the change in how he addressed mail, how it started coming in only his name, or in Nicole's, never mine. I went through every financial record I could find, and I noticed something strange. 3 months before he changed the will, Thomas had sold a small investment property we jointly owned. Except, my name was no longer on the title. He'd forged my signature. Miriam's face lit up when I showed her. "That's not just fraud, Caroline. That's criminal. Present day." After the reading, I waited until the courtroom emptied. Nicole strutted out first, practically humming. I could hear her heels clicking like applause down the hallway. Thomas lingered a little longer, unsure if he should say something. But I didn't give him the chance. I turned and walked out, past the courtroom doors, past the knot in my throat, past the part of me that ever thought this man loved me. Outside, Miriam was waiting on the courthouse steps. She handed me a thick envelope. "Everything's ready. We file today." I nodded. "He won't see it coming." She smiled. "Oh, but he will. That's the point." That afternoon, Thomas came home to a stack of legal papers sitting on the entry table, right next to the crystal bowl he insisted we buy from that overpriced gallery in Savannah. He called me twice, then 3 times. I didn't answer. The next morning, Miriam filed a motion to freeze all estate assets pending legal review, which meant Thomas couldn't touch a cent. Nicole tried to use the Hilton Head house the following weekend. She found the locks changed and a notice on the door. "Pending litigation. Entry prohibited." She posted a photo of it on Instagram, with the caption, "Stepmothers are just failed wives with more paperwork." I screenshotted it. My attorney loved that. 1 month later, the fraud case moved faster than I expected. Thomas had forged my name on more than just the one property. There were loan applications, tax documents, even a power of attorney he'd used to move my retirement funds. He tried to claim I'd given consent, but my signature on those documents didn't match any of my legal IDs. He wasn't even careful, just arrogant. The court took it seriously, criminally seriously. By the time the fraud hearing was scheduled, Thomas's accounts were frozen, his lawyer had backed out, and Nicole had gone suspiciously silent. And me? I was one signature away from taking everything back. That signature, the final document, was a legal settlement agreement. In exchange for dropping the fraud charges, Thomas would revert all asset ownership to its original state, half of everything, plus penalties, plus legal fees, and, because Miriam insisted, the Hilton Head property would be put in a trust solely under my control. Nicole would never see a dime of it. I stared at the document for a long time, then I signed it. One clean, steady signature. Not forged, not fake, not desperate, just mine. Back in my name. 2 weeks later, I walked through the front door of the Hilton Head house, barefoot, sun warm on the tiles. It felt different now, like a place I chose, not one I was allowed to live in. The betrayal hadn't faded, not completely, but neither had my sense of self. In fact, it was sharper than ever. Thomas had tried to erase me, but I wrote myself back in. And this time, in ink he couldn't wash away.